Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Before we begin, let me wish everyone a very happy and prosperous new year. And also remember that on the account of new year, tomorrow we won't be coming out with our comprehensive news analysis and the daily quiz. So let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This editorial deals with the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 2010 and the controversy surrounding international funding of NGOs. There's also a related article on page number 15 of the online edition of The Hindu, which we are going to discuss in order to comprehensively understand this topic. See, the FCRA is in news because recently the Ministry of Home Affairs had declined to renew the FCRA license of a popular NGO known as Missionaries of Charity. If you remember, I had covered this development and topic briefly in our daily quiz on the 28th of December. We had understood that the Ministry of Home Affairs had rejected the FCRA license renewal application of Missionaries of Charity, which was founded by Mother Teresa, on the grounds that this organization was not meeting some of the eligibility criteria, and also the Home Ministry had received certain adverse inputs against the functioning of this NGO. Also, initially it was misreported that the government had frozen the bank accounts of this NGO, but later it was clarified that it was not the government which froze the accounts, but the NGO itself requested the freezing of its bank accounts following the rejection of its license renewal application. So this brought the topic of FCRA back into news. And since the last several years, NGOs have been questioning the manner in which the government has been blocking international funding to their organizations. According to the editorial, currently thousands of NGOs are waiting for their license renewal by the Home Ministry. And as the deadline expires today at midnight, thousands of NGOs are at the risk of losing access to international donations. So it is in this context that we need to understand what are the provisions of FCRA and what are the arguments being made by the government and the NGOs to defend their respective positions. See, FCRA or Foreign Contribution Regulation Act basically regulates foreign donations to associations, organizations and NGOs that are operating in India. This act was first introduced in 1976 when the then government feared that foreign funding could be misused to create internal security challenges for the country. During the Cold War era, there was sufficient reason to believe that certain organizations and NGOs in India could be funded by hostile interests in order to further their geopolitical objectives and as well as their religious objectives. This in turn could pose a threat to India's economic security and as well as to India's national security. It was also feared that foreign funding of certain organizations could be misused to create communal and societal divides, which could also threaten India's security. So, on these grounds, in 1976, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act was enacted to regulate foreign funding that would be received by organizations and NGOs operating out of India. But however, in 2010, several deficiencies were found in the Act, and hence the old Act was repealed and a new FCRA was enacted in 2010. Currently, this is the Act which is in operation, and recently it has been amended as well in 2020. With this amendment, the FCRA has been turned into a stringent law that allows the government to effectively regulate international funding of NGOs in the country. So this act essentially governs and regulates the international donations and funding received by associations, groups, or non-governmental organizations in India. As per the law, it is mandatory for all these organizations to register under the Act by submitting required applications and documents to the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is responsible for enforcing the Act. In this application, the organization will have to clearly spell out all its activities in the country, along with the purpose and intent behind receiving international funding. If all the norms are met, the MHA will grant a FCRA registration, which will be initially valid for a period of 5 years. And along with the registration, they will also have to obtain a license to be eligible for receiving international funds, which also has to be renewed periodically. The continued registration of the organization and the renewal of its license is dependent on the ability of the organization to comply with the norms and guidelines that have been laid down by the Ministry of Home Affairs. As per these norms, the organization is required to maintain accounting and auditing standards as prescribed by the government, and as and when required, these will have to be submitted to the ministry. These organizations will also have to file for annual returns, just like we file IT returns, which helps the government in scrutinizing the utilization of funds. As per the law, these organizations will be bound to strictly adhere to the purpose for which the organization was allowed to function in the country and have to show that they are using international funds only for the stated purpose, and on no account their activities can pose a threat to the country's national security and public interest. As per the 2015 guidelines that were issued by the Home Ministry, the acceptance of foreign funds by these NGOs cannot prejudicially affect the sovereignty and integrity of the nation or impact friendly relations of India with any foreign state. These funds also cannot be used to disrupt communal harmony in the country. And as per the guidelines, they've also been mandated to maintain a FCRA account either with a nationalized bank or with such private banks which have implemented core banking solutions so that all their financial activity can be accessed by India's security and intelligence agencies. The Act also goes on to specify as to who cannot receive foreign funds. For example, members of legislature like MPs and MLAs, judges of High Court and Supreme Court, government officials, journalists, and even election candidates and the others, they cannot receive foreign funds through the FCRA route. Prior to 2017, even political parties fell under the same bracket, but in a highly controversial move, political parties were exempted from these restrictions in 2017 when the government retrospectively amended the FCRA Act through the Finance Bill. So this allows political parties to receive foreign funding without any scrutiny or restrictions. And along with this, they also have the route of electoral bonds through which foreign funding can be accepted by political parties. And through several previous discussions, we have explained the controversy around electoral bonds as well. And you might remember that electoral bonds lack transparency, and without any accountability, political parties have been receiving foreign funds through electoral bonds as well. So as you can see, the FCRA was primarily designed to restrict foreign funding to NGOs in particular, and this is where the controversy arises. See, as you know, NGOs are involved in social work and welfare work. They contribute immensely to the society by working in critical areas such as education, healthcare, poverty alleviation, and they play a critical role in bridging the governance deficit. In areas and sectors where the government cannot reach out, the government itself relies on NGOs to deliver the services. And if you look at several government schemes and welfare programs of both the center and the states, you will notice that NGOs would have been given a lead role in the implementation of several welfare schemes and programs. That's the reason why the topic of NGOs has also been included in our UPSC syllabus under GS Paper 2 under governance. Because NGOs are playing a key role in improving governance in the country and in delivering basic socio-economic welfare to the weakest sections of the society. So in the line of their work, many of these NGOs do receive foreign funding and donations, which are absolutely essential to enable them to continue their operations. There could also be several foreign-based NGOs which carry out welfare activities in India by drawing upon international donations. So on one hand, majority of the NGOs are doing a stellar work in aiding the government by delivering socio-economic welfare at the grassroots. But however, there could be a few NGOs which could be misused, and there could also be few NGOs which have been established deliberately for this purpose, so that foreign funding can be routed into the country in order to destabilize India. There could be many actors who would be interested in this, and they could rely upon this route of funding NGOs for this purpose. For example, hostile foreign governments and their intelligence agencies are known to use NGOs and fund such activities which could weaken the government or which could threaten India's economy or which could even potentially disrupt our social harmony. In fact, this is a preferred tool in the world of geopolitics, where one country wages a covert war against another, and intelligence agencies they often fund a few select NGOs to carry out these subtle and unnoticeable acts of subversion. For example, let's say India is building a strategically important military project in an environmentally sensitive location. So, a hostile country which feels threatened by this military project of India could possibly sponsor an environmental NGO in India which would be willing to use these funds to carry out environmental protests against the project in order to derail the project. Similarly, there could be hostile non state actors, such as radical groups and terrorist outfits, which could also fund a few organizations to promote radicalization in the country. There could also be global private businesses who might try to hurt India's economic interests in order to protect and promote their respective business interests. There could also be foreign religious entities and organizations which might be funding religious conversion and communal polarization in the name of charity. So, based on these threats that exist, the subsequent governments of India have often acted against NGOs, and this has led to a major controversy around the FCRA. See, like I said, NGOs are crucial in governance and delivery of services, and they are playing an important role in socio-economic welfare. Most of the NGOs will be functioning by keeping the best interests of the country in mind. But however, there could be few organizations and foreign entities who might be trying to misuse this route to create security challenges for the nation. But just because there are few NGOs which might be resorting to such activities, the government cannot take any blanket action against all NGOs by often misusing the provisions of FCRA. The editorial observes that the current NDA government and even the previous UPA government both established a trend where they were seen to be targeting specific NGOs working in the sectors of human rights, pollution, environment protection, and religious organizations. While government action against some of these NGOs might have been justified on security grounds, quite often this excuse is misused by the government to bring up the threat of the foreign hand that could be trying to destabilize the country. So, the grounds of security, governments might misuse the law to curb dissent and criticism, because there could be a human rights organization which might be criticizing the government for failing to protect human rights. There could be an environmental organization opposing the harmful projects of the government which might threaten the environment. So, in order to stifle such dissent and criticism, governments might make use of the route and misuse FCRA provisions to even target such NGOs. This is the concern being expressed by the editorial because such blatant and blanket actions are often taken by authoritative countries like China and Russia and not by democratic countries like India. In China and Russia, the same national security excuse has been used to shut down all the NGOs in what is clearly an attempt to curb dissent and criticism against the government. So it is such blatant misuse of the law that the editorial is criticizing. But we should also recognize that most NGOs are doing stellar work in the field of socio-economic welfare, and at the same time, there could be a few NGOs which could be misused by foreign elements to create security challenges for the country. The point that the editorial is making is that by taking such blanket action against NGOs on security grounds, the government has crippled international funding to even genuine NGOs. According to reports, there has been a 30% drop in international funding in the last few years because the government has taken up a fight against most popular NGOs as well and has even suspended the foreign funding licenses of many popular organizations like Amnesty International, Greenpeace, Public Health Foundation of India, which was backed by the Bill Gates Foundation, etc. Even such popular NGOs, which have been doing some groundwork, have been banned from receiving further foreign funding, thereby crippling their operations in the country. The government has said that these actions have been taken on security grounds because many of these organizations were reportedly threatening the economic and national security of India. But however, such government actions are not entirely transparent, and this has not only led to international criticism against the Indian government, but it has also significantly brought down international funding to genuine NGOs which are carrying out groundwork in the field of socio-economic welfare. So the editorial argues that if the government is misusing the law to target dissent and criticism, then the drop in international funding will directly affect the welfare activities of these NGOs. And especially during the pandemic, it will be the poorest people and the vulnerable sections which will be hit the hardest, as some of these genuine NGOs will no longer be able to function without international donations. So then what could be the way forward? The way forward is that the government should be more transparent in its FCRA actions. The government should definitely restrict hostile NGOs which are threatening the country's national security. But this should be an exceptional step only in genuine cases, and the action taken has to be transparent with sufficient evidence being provided. But otherwise, most of the NGOs are doing genuine welfare work and they need to be further encouraged by the government. And the government has to create a favorable policy so that they can easily tap into international donations and funding, which could only help in India's socio-economic development. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, in which the writer examines some of the key findings of the National Family Health Survey Edition 5. The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has recently published the 5th edition of the NFHS, or the National Family Health Survey. And according to the writer, it definitely provides for several positive signs and encouraging news. But it also highlights the social discrimination that exists against women and children on the lines of gender, which is directly compromising the improvement in their healthcare indicators. So the National Family Health Survey captures several important health indicators and helps us understand the progress that India is making towards promoting the health and well-being of its citizens. The latest report which has been brought out by the ministry points to several major improvements that India has made in healthcare. For example, there is good news for India with regard to population stabilization. The survey shows that India's population stabilization strategies seem to be working, and as a result, India has achieved a significant reduction in its fertility rate. India's average TFR, or total fertility rate, has declined from 2.2 to 2, and nearly 31 states and union territories have registered a TFR below 2.1, which is considered as replacement level fertility. See, total fertility rate is nothing but the average number of children a woman has in her lifetime. If the total fertility rate is 2.1, it means that each couple are having just 2 children on an average, and hence those 2 children are going to replace their 2 parents, thus providing for population stabilization, which helps in restricting exponential population growth. Hence, this total fertility rate of 2.1 is referred to as replacement level fertility. Because at this level of fertility rate, we are providing for the replacement of the population, meaning population growth will stabilize, and below 2.1, the population will start declining. So majority of the Indian states and union territories have registered a total fertility rate of below 2.1, and the national average has fallen to 2, which means that India is well on its way to witness a decline in its population in the coming years. So this data on fertility rate shows that India's healthcare system has been able to deliver on family planning, contraceptives, and it points towards increasing adoption of modern family planning by couples. The survey also shows that access to contraceptives has gone up, and these factors have directly contributed to India's declining fertility rate. But the most important factor in this success has been the improving rates of female literacy in the country. Because it's a well established fact that as female literacy improves, and as there is an improvement in women education and especially girl education, women are most likely to delay their marriage and they often say no to child marriage. And they also often get to exercise their bodily autonomy and bodily integrity and decide upon the time of their pregnancy and the number of pregnancies. So, as women are more educated and as they become empowered, they get to break the shackles imposed upon them by the society, especially in a patriarchal society. And as they take better decisions with regard to marriage and pregnancy, it automatically brings down the fertility rate. This is an example that we are seeing not just in India, but even across Asian countries, we have seen a similar trend. As access to quality education improves amongst girls and women, we get to witness a notable decline in fertility rate as well. So, this important finding has been brought out by the National Family Health Survey, and it clearly points towards India's improving fertility rate. Along with this, another success for India is that it has improved its maternal and infant healthcare services. Over the last 25 to 30 years, India has made significant investments in maternal and infant healthcare, and as a result, it has brought down its maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate. Data from the fifth edition of the National Family Health Survey also points towards this, and it clearly shows the improvements that India has made with regard to antenatal care and postnatal care. Along with this, institutional deliveries have gone up, which means pregnant women have access to professional medical services, thereby improving the health of the pregnant woman and the child. But however, on this front, there is one noticeable concern. A few specific regions have fallen behind with regard to access to institutional deliveries and access to professional medical care for pregnant women. States such as Nagaland, Meghalaya, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, etc., they still have a lot of catching up to do, not just with regard to promoting institutional deliveries and maternal and infant health care, but states like Bihar and UP also fall behind with regard to family planning and contraception, thus registering higher fertility rates than the rest of the country. So the survey points out that when it comes to fertility rate, population stabilization strategies, and maternal and infant health care, the government has to give more focus and attention for few specific regions which are falling behind on these key indicators. Then the report also points out that teenage pregnancy amongst teenagers and adolescents has only declined marginally. This is again a cause for concern, and it's a direct result of the societal norms and social discrimination that still exists on the topic of sexual and reproductive health. The writer feels that such patriarchal societal norms affects women and girl children in particular because patriarchal conservative societies they desist from promoting sex education, thereby contributing to higher incidence of teenage pregnancy. Hence, the government, along with the civil society, will have to focus on promoting sex education at all levels of schools and colleges, not just to break the conservative mindset of the society, but also to promote sexual and reproductive health amongst teenagers. So, in short, even though the report provides some encouraging news about India's healthcare performance, there are some serious concerns, especially with regard to healthcare of women and girl children, which is arising out of gender based discrimination that is very prevalent in our societal norms. Hence, the writer stresses that the government should prioritize the bodily autonomy and bodily integrity of women and girls in its healthcare policies and calls for sufficient investments in women empowerment, which is solely capable of taking down this social discrimination that exists in our conservative patriarchal society. Bodily autonomy and bodily integrity means that a woman should be able to control her bodily functions, which extends to her right over marriage, sexual intercourse, and pregnancy. Quite often, in conservative patriarchal societies, these are forced upon a woman, thus violating their bodily autonomy and integrity. This not only contributes to unwanted pregnancies, but it also affects their health care. Hence, the writer is calling upon the government to make adequate investments in girl education, in extending banking services to women, providing mobile and internet connections to women, and enable women to get paid for their jobs, including domestic activities. And only through such empowerment can women take back their bodily autonomy and bodily integrity. In this regard, the National Family Health Survey provides a few positive indicators, and it shows that girl education has gone up. The number of women owning a bank account has increased significantly, and even the number of women and girls having access to mobile phone and internet connection has gone up. So, as women become more educated and as they secure their own livelihoods, they are more likely to break the societal norms and gain control over their bodily autonomy, thus leading to significant improvements in the country's healthcare indicators. When women and the girl child are empowered through better education and through financial independence, you will automatically notice an improvement in menstrual hygiene standards. Even the survey points out that adoption of menstrual hygiene standards has gone up, especially in areas and regions where women education is promoted and where women are more financially independent. Similarly, it will help in curbing the practice of child marriage because an empowered woman is likely to take her own decision with regard to marriage and as well as with regard to pregnancy. But apart from these interventions, the writer says that the government should also focus on conditional training of men, especially boys, in their formative years, so that the patriarchal and masculine mindset that exists can be broken at the grassroots, thus providing for a gender equal society. Because the findings of the survey clearly shows that the gender discrimination that exists in our societal norms is directly contributing to the poor health of women and the girl child. So to tackle this, what we need is a set of targeted strategies by the government, which should specifically focus on those indicators and regions which are falling behind their performance. And it also requires a complete convergence of all the healthcare stakeholders, which includes not just the government, but also the civil society, the private healthcare industry, and as well as international organizations. A combined effort of all the stakeholders, along with targeted interventions that are focused on indicators and regions which are falling behind, can truly help India improve its healthcare performance and put India on the path of achieving its sustainable development goals. Now let's look at an article from page number 11, which helps us understand the latest outreach of China into the Indian Ocean region. We have discussed in several previous sessions the growing strategic competition between India and China in the Indian Ocean region. Both the powers are competing for economic and strategic influence in the Indian Ocean, and while India has put in place the Sagar Doctrine to promote its diplomatic, economic, and strategic relations with Indian Ocean countries, China, on the other hand, has been stepping up its economic and strategic investments primarily through the Belt and Road Initiative. So, as the India China competition intensifies in the Indian Ocean, China's foreign minister is all set to pay a visit to five important littoral countries of the Indian Ocean. In the coming days, Chinese foreign minister is going to pay a visit to important East African countries such as Eritrea and Kenya, and he's also going to pay a visit to the African island nation of Comoros, located in the Western Indian Ocean. After these visits to three African countries, which are littoral states of the Indian Ocean, the Chinese foreign minister is going to head towards the South Asian countries of Maldives and Sri Lanka. This visit to Maldives and Sri Lanka comes at a time when China and Maldives are celebrating the 50th anniversary of their diplomatic relations, along with the 65th anniversary of China-Sri Lanka diplomatic relations. This also marks the 70th anniversary of the Rubber Rice Pact signed between China and Sri Lanka in 1950s, which provided for the purchase of Chinese rice by Sri Lanka to meet its food security needs in exchange for China's rubber purchase from Sri Lanka. This economic deal, signed in the 1950s, laid the foundation for a strong diplomatic relationship between China and Sri Lanka. So today, China has been reaching out to the Indian Ocean countries in a very big way by offering them lucrative investments in order to gain economic influence and as well as strategic and security influence. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China has already funded several important infrastructure projects across the Indian Ocean, which brings China into direct strategic competition with India. This visit of the Chinese foreign minister especially to Maldives and Sri Lanka, comes at a time when there is intense competition going on between India and China in these two countries. Next, in a related article on page number 1, it has been reported that China has published a new map in which it has not only claimed Arunachal Pradesh as a part of its territory by referring to Arunachal Pradesh as Zhangnan or as South Tibet, but it has also issued standardized names for 15 locations in India's Arunachal Pradesh. China has given standardized Chinese names for geographical features like few mountains, rivers, and mountain pass, and as well as for few commercial centers and towns, thus trying to project that this region belongs to Chinese territory. In fact, this is a long standing practice of China to claim Arunachal Pradesh for itself, and it has often referred to Arunachal Pradesh as South Tibet. But India has always rejected these claims, as Arunachal Pradesh happens to be an integral part of Indian territory. Next, according to this article on page number 8, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment is all set to launch an ambitious scheme known as SMILE. It stands for Support for Marginalized Individuals for Livelihood and Enterprise. This scheme will specifically focus on transgender people and those who are engaged in begging. As transgenders and beggars belong to the marginalized classes, the scheme seeks to protect their livelihood and promote enterprise activities amongst them. So the SMILE scheme will consist of two sub-schemes. One is welfare of transgender persons and the other is for persons engaged in begging. Through these initiatives, the Social Justice Ministry will provide for rehabilitation of the marginalized classes in order to prevent their exploitation and abuse, and will also provide for adequate medical facilities, counseling, skill development and education, and will also create economic linkages in order to secure and protect their livelihood. Next, according to this article on page number 12, India and Australia are all set to finalize an interim free trade agreement. Currently, India and Australia are negotiating a full-fledged free trade agreement known as the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. This full-fledged agreement, which will likely cover goods, services, and investments, is expected to be finalized only by the end of next year, and hence, in the meantime, they are planning to sign an interim free trade agreement, which is often referred to as an early harvest agreement, which will cover a few limited goods, services, and investments before the full-fledged agreement can be finalized by next year. This interim FTA is going to cover not just few goods, services, and investments, but will also cover rules of origin, customs facilitation, legal and institutional issues in order to facilitate free trade between the two countries. It is expected to lay the foundation for a full-fledged free trade agreement that is likely to be signed by next year. Through this agreement, both the countries are expecting to boost their bilateral trade to $100 billion in the next 5 years, thus helping cement the close strategic partnership between the two countries. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: how does the FCRA regulate donations? Critically examine the issues related to foreign donations received by NGOs. The second question: the recently released 5th edition of NFHS has encouraging news, but addressing discriminatory social norms must remain our top priority. Critically evaluate. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be given in the description box below. So with this, let's conclude our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.